10 years had passed since my mother-in-law became confined to a wheelchair. Regular hospital checkups and physical therapy were routine for her. On this particular day, she was undergoing tests, and I found myself waiting in the hospital's waiting room before her therapy session. In the midst of my thoughts, a doctor suddenly pulled on my arm, a deep concern etched on his face. "I'm going to speak with her primary doctor about this," he announced. Gently releasing my arm, I observed that the doctor in front of me was a man, whereas my mother-in-law's primary doctor was a woman. Confused about the need for a doctor who wasn't her primary to discuss her case, I questioned the situation. The male doctor hastily grabbed my hands, realizing my suspicion. "There's something neither your mother-in-law nor her primary doctor should hear. That's why I only want to tell you," he explained. Intrigued, I took a step closer to him. "My name is Julie, a 37-year-old office worker. Recently, I've been working remotely for a small and medium-sized company. However, the doctor's revelation seemed unrelated to my mother-in-law's condition." He continued, "When I was a child, my mother left home, and I was raised by my father in a single-parent family. Despite my father's warnings about my mother being a spendthrift, I never felt lonely due to the love he showered on me. I eventually went to college and found a job, leading an independent life. 14 years ago, I married Mike. His mother warmly welcomed me into their family, treating me like her own daughter. However, tragedy struck when my mother-in-law was involved in a car accident, leaving her wheelchair-bound. Despite various caregivers, her condition deteriorated, and she expressed loneliness, prompting us to move back to care for her temporarily. As my husband and I visited her, she seemed relieved and began to smile. However, when we mentioned returning to work, her demeanor changed, and she didn't allow us to leave. My mother-in-law pleaded with desperation, her voice nearly hysterical. "No, please, both of you don't leave. Don't leave me alone." Attempting to calm her, I assured, "Mike really needs to return to his job, but I'll talk to my company and see if I can stay here a bit longer. I'll come back as often as I can. Just hang in there for me, Julie." With tearful eyes, she implored, "If you can stay, that would be great. Mike, you better come back, okay? I'll be waiting." After losing her husband, she had endured loneliness for a long time. Our sudden notification of departure likely triggered anxiety and confusion. Her weakened state over the past week heightened her fear of facing loneliness. After discussions with my company, I decided to switch to remote work and operate from home temporarily to care for my mother-in-law. However, her aversion to being alone persisted. Even when I worked from home, she clung to me relentlessly. I couldn't let her be seen by my coworkers, and no matter how close we might be, she'd always be waiting where she could see me. It felt like I was under constant surveillance, leading to a growing sense of resentment. Meanwhile, Mike would come home on weekends and take days off during the week to assist with her care. Despite ongoing physical therapy, her condition showed no improvement, preventing my return to the office. Our personal lives became dominated by her care, leaving no time for just the two of us. The 10th year of this lifestyle marked her 65th birthday, and with each passing year, her dependency on us grew. My husband, unable to bear the situation, reduced his visits year by year. Even if I stepped out for a few minutes, my mother-in-law would panic, insisting I take her with me. Calming her down took ages, and I couldn't go back to our own home. Yet, I couldn't abandon the woman who had welcomed me without judgment or prejudice from a single-parent household. Then, a pivotal moment arrived. During a routine checkup, I accompanied my mother-in-law to the hospital as always. Dr. Mia, a woman in her 30s, had been her trusted doctor for a decade. When my mother-in-law went into the examination room, a young male doctor named Ryan approached me. Startled, he said, "Excuse me, you're Sally's daughter, right?" Sally was my mother-in-law's first name. Ryan explained that he recently joined the hospital and worked in the same department as Dr. Mia. Intrigued, I replied, "Yes, I'm her daughter-in-law. What's going on?" Ryan apologized for the sudden approach and requested a moment to discuss something about my mother-in-law. Curious, I agreed, realizing her appointment probably wasn't over yet. Agreeing to Dr. Ryan's request, he led me to a small private consultation room not far from the examination area. Motioning for me to sit, he took a seat across a small desk, fixing his gaze directly into my eyes. "You're currently living with Sally to take care of her, right?" Dr. Ryan inquired. "Oh yes, that's correct," I replied. I explained that for the past decade, I had been working from my mother-in-law's home while tending to her needs. The increased dependency had left me with little personal time, causing my husband to avoid coming home. Listening intently, Dr. Ryan nodded. I found myself expressing all the frustrations that had built up. Apologizing for the venting, I remarked, "I'm sorry for going on like this." Dr. Ryan reassured, "It's completely all right. Anyway, 10 years, that's quite a commitment." His face turned thoughtful, and then he looked at me with a serious expression. However, before his words could reach me, a scream from my mother-in-law pierced the air. Both Dr. Ryan and I rushed to the examination room, only to witness an unthinkable scene that left me speechless. Dr. Ryan urged, "You should leave that house as soon as possible. Get away from your mother-in-law." Suppressing my anger, I nodded, and without heading to my mother-in-law, I went straight to the police. Despite skepticism, they promised to investigate. I hastily packed my belongings from the house, the disturbing image from the hospital replaying in my mind. An hour later, while still packing, I explained everything to my husband over a call. Numerous calls and messages from my mother-in-law flooded my phone, but I continued to ignore them. In the evening, my husband and the police arrived, and that's when I finally answered a call from my mother-in-law. Angrily, she demanded to know why I had left her behind. With a firm attitude, I informed her, "I realized I don't need to live with you anymore. I'm going back to the house where my husband is." Indignant, my mother-in-law ranted and raved. With a sigh, I responded, "Why don't you just walk back home from the hospital? After all, your legs are fine, so you don't need a wheelchair or care, right?" As I continued explaining, my mother-in-law let out a short scream, conveying her extreme upset. I could vividly imagine her emotional turmoil as I disclosed the revelations I had discovered. I shared with her the unsettling information that Dr. Ryan had conveyed and the first-hand experience of witnessing an unexpected turn of events. Dr. Ryan had revealed that recent tests showed no physical issues with the muscles or nerves in her body. Instead, he speculated that her belief in her inability to walk might be psychological. The power of such beliefs could be formidable, and Dr. Ryan considered both physical and psychological care for her legs. In his efforts to include me as a family member in the care plan, he had called me over. However, it turned out that my presence wasn't necessary. During our conversation, a scream echoed from the examination room, my mother-in-law's. Dr. Ryan and I hurriedly went to check the room, finding her gesturing as if swatting away an insect. To our surprise, it was a false alarm. She had mistaken dust for a bug. In a surreal moment, she picked up the motionless dust and walked to the trash can, revealing that she could walk without the need for a wheelchair or cane, moving with astonishing ease. Dr. Ryan pushed me to the corner of the hallway, and we observed silently as my mother-in-law, seemingly unaware of our presence, calmly returned to her wheelchair. Dr. Mia entered the room, exchanged an envelope with my mother-in-law, and, acting nonchalantly, pushed her wheelchair toward the physical therapy facility. Stunned by the unfolding events, I stood frozen until Dr. Ryan gently shook me out of my daze. He had advised me to leave my mother-in-law's house immediately, and I hurriedly packed, desperate to escape this surreal revelation. Throughout my narrative, my mother-in-law remained silent. Finally, with an audible sigh over the phone, she began to speak, perhaps realizing she couldn't evade the truth any longer. Acknowledging the car accident that initially left her wheelchair-bound, she admitted that thanks to treatments, she could walk with the aid of a cane about 5 years after the incident. Listening in disbelief over the speaker, my husband and I were stunned. What puzzled us most was the purpose of the 12 years we had spent caring for her. She expressed her fear that once we discovered she could walk, we would leave her side. Tearfully, she admitted, "Julie, Mike, I couldn't bear that thought. I feared losing you both, and that's why I kept up the pretense. I truly love you like my own daughter." My mother-in-law had often expressed her loneliness after Mike moved out and my husband passed away. Despite her repeated pleas, our hearts remained unmoved. While we understood her feelings, we believed the way she went about it was wrong. Apologizing, we explained, "We can't be by your side any longer. Sorry, Mom, Mike, but the way you went about it was wrong." I continued, expressing my own sentiments. "I've been taking care of you for the past 10 years while working. My colleagues have experienced promotions, marriages, and childbirth. Because of your care, I couldn't have a child of my own. I had almost given up on having kids, but now I feel like the past 10 years are in vain. Why did you deceive us to the point of having us care for you? We would have visited you during our time off. Why did it have to be this way?" Though I didn't mean to blame her, tears welled up as the words poured out. With my husband supporting me, I conveyed that I no longer intended to care for her. We decided to leave her house that day and cut off all contact. Despite her protests and hysteria, we hung up, contacting the police, who assured us they would begin an investigation. 2 months later, while at a hospital with my husband, Dr. Mia, my mother-in-law's supposed doctor, rushed over to us. We remembered her with fuller cheeks, but now she looked gaunt and fatigued. Curious about her presence, we reluctantly listened as she approached with a desperate look. Dr. Mia revealed that she knew all along that my mother-in-law's leg was healed. She had accepted money to provide a false disability diagnosis. The money was in the envelope she received from my mother-in-law that day. Due to a recent complaint by Dr. Ryan, the hospital discovered her forgery and fired her immediately. Furthermore, she faced potential arrest for fabricating medical records, and her medical license was likely to be revoked. Incredibly, Dr. Mian insisted that the money wasn't an appreciation gift from my mother-in-law, but hush money from my husband and me. She alleged that we plotted to scam disability pension by making my mother-in-law disabled. However, there was no evidence to support these claims. It was shocking to realize that Dr. Mia, facing legal trouble, had shifted the blame onto us. In disbelief, I responded, "What are you talking about? We haven't done anything like that." Dr. Mia persisted, claiming it was the truth. "I'm going to tell the police everything," Dr. Mia shouted, her eyes red with rage, making us turn pale. While her claims lacked evidence, proving our innocence would be challenging, and the mere thought terrified us. My husband and I were on the verge of tears when a woman approached us, standing between Dr. Mia and us, shielding us from her wrath. Aren't you the head doctor here? I urgently need to talk to you," she said. Upon seeing the woman, Dr. Mia turned deathly pale, quickly putting on a forced smile and approaching her with flattery. The woman glaring at Dr. Mia was the head doctor of the hospital, and she was Yvonne, my mother. Yes, my mother, from whom I was separated as a child due to her divorce, was now a doctor and held a prominent position in a major university hospital. She was one of the people advocating for revoking Dr. Mia's medical license upon learning about her misdeeds. "Oh, you're related. In that case, could you please just hear me out?" Dr. Mia begged, trying to invoke my mother's sympathy. However, my mother shook her head, stating, "Don't mess with me. You and Sally have been deceiving the hospital and the authorities for 10 years, keeping my daughters confined at home. Sally kept them at home because she was afraid to be alone. You, on the other hand, funded your debts from your nightlife with Sally's disability benefits. You frauds need to face appropriate punishment and make amends." Dr. Mia's plea was abruptly dismissed, and realizing there was nothing she could do, she slumped to the ground in despair. Whispers and stares from those around us focused on her, and we couldn't help but watch with indescribable feelings. Suddenly, a strong pull came from behind, startling me. I turned around to find, astonishingly, my mother-in-law standing firmly beside my father. My father angrily shouted at my mother, demanding, "What have you done to Julie?" I was taken aback, wondering why my father was there and why with my mother-in-law. When I heard that Sally was looking for Julie, I wanted to help. "You moved to a place without telling me, And I thought I would meet you if I followed Dr. Mia, my father explained. The reason I hadn't told my father our whereabouts wasn't just because of the family connection between my mother-in-law and him. Since my mother-in-law's car accident, I had asked my father to look after her when I was out for work. During those times, they became close and started dating secretly behind our backs. I had found out about this last year, suspecting their relationship when I saw them talking closely at my in-laws' house. "Give Julie back. I won't let you take her away," my father yelled at my mother, an intensity I'd never seen before. Brushing off his grip, I shouted, "Stop it. I know all the stories you told me about Mom are lies." My father's face went pale at my revelation. Since the divorce, he had been feeding me lies about my mother to ensure I didn't want to meet her. The stories about her treating him like a slave or leaving him for a younger man were all false. My mother, an accomplished doctor, always had a busy schedule, and my father knew this when they married. However, after I started daycare, his attitude shifted drastically. Blaming her for our lack of family vacations, he decided to divorce her, claiming she wasn't a good mother. On my 4th birthday, my father suddenly took me and left home. In reality, it was him who left, not my mother. Following the divorce settlement, even though my mother had a decent income, she couldn't guarantee time for raising me. My father was nominated to live with me. However, my mother had been sending a substantial amount in child support every month. I didn't know this until I met my mother. Even after becoming a single parent, my father ensured I didn't want to see my mother by portraying her in a negative light with false stories. It seemed that my mother wanted to see me, but most of the time, she was overseas for training or research. She kept sending me letters from overseas that my father kept refusing, hiding the letters. There were times when it seemed they might meet, but something always came up. Either my mother got an emergency call at the hospital, or my father would come up with an excuse to cancel at the last minute. I had been told since I was young that my mother couldn't be reached, or that no one knew where she was. It turned out that was a lie. The reason my father could afford to travel once every 2 months and pay for my high school and college tuition was thanks to the child support money from my mother. Our comfortable life was all thanks to her. So the story of my father working late nights was also a sham to make it seem like he was struggling with parenting. He'd work a regular 9-to-5 job, then spend nights somewhere, coming home only in the early morning. When my father yelled, "Where's your proof?" my mother calmly showed him a mobile bank app, saying, "This is how much I've transferred to you over the years for Julie, and your company unusually has strict policies against second jobs, so it was impossible. I can confirm with them if you'd like." My father crumbled, and my mother-in-law tried to comfort him. Seeing my father like this made me realize that I had been lied to my entire life. While the truth was shocking, I felt more anger than anything else. I said coldly, "Thanks for everything, Dad, but it's time to say goodbye." Saying that, my father clung to me, and my mother-in-law said, "Julie, your dad did everything he thought was best for you." No, he did it for himself. He lied about struggling as a single parent, using the money from my mom. And you lied to my husband and me, trying to bind us to your home. Both of you are a perfect match for your lies. Please stay away from us. With no excuses left, my father and my mother-in-law were speechless. Ignoring their stunned faces, we left the hospital with my mother. Later, Dr. Mia was arrested and lost her medical license. She had forged medical documents multiple times and was sentenced to imprisonment. Additionally, the hospital she worked for is suing her for defamation. My mother-in-law had bribed a doctor for a fake diagnosis, leading to her having to pay back all the pension money she received with interest. She's also facing fraud charges, as informed by the police. Mike says he's cut ties with her, so he's not bothered about her future. I'm trying not to care either. As for me, I realized I had been somewhat dependent on my mother-in-law. Feeling betrayed sent me into a mental spiral. So I've been seeing a therapist at the hospital where my mother works. Regarding my reunion with my mother, when I was getting a referral at my previous hospital, the doctor's name I was referred to was the same as my mother's. To my surprise, it was actually her. My mother was skeptical when she saw a patient named me, but during the consultation, she realized it was me. Our reunion can only be described as miraculous. I can't be treated by my mother due to hospital rules, but she supports me from behind the scenes. I've been back to my job at the office while still attending therapy. When visiting Dr. Ryan, who informed me of the truth about my mother-in-law, I heard that he and my husband were old high school buddies. We now often hang out with Ryan visiting our place, and everything feels like old times. It may be hard for me to forget how I was tied up by my mother-in-law and my father. But my husband, my mother, and Dr. Ryan always encourage me to take things easy and do what I want. Thanks to that, I'm planning trips with my friends or going to cafes by myself.